Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with Angela Garbez to talk about her important new book, Essential Labor, Mothering a Social Change. The club would also like to thank the Bernard Osher Foundation for supporting today's Good Lit event. Angela, welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to start off by telling you what I was doing when I started reading your book,
Okay.
which was that I was roasting poblano peppers. And the reason I mentioned that is because as I was reading it, I was like, this is like, there's no reason really to there's no utilitarian reason to roast poblano peppers. It takes forever. It's kind of labor intensive, but it's like delicious and like I want it. And that's kind of like, I really appreciate the way like desire informs this book, like the desire to, and the audacity to desire like a better life, like a better collective life. And you write, or you ask, how under our current circumstances that leave mothers and caregivers so depleted, might we demand more from American family life? Raising children should not be as lonely, bankrupting, and exhausting as it is. So I was wondering if maybe you wanted to just talk about like the desire that motivated you to even write this book and what you're responding to.
Sure. Wait, I wanted to ask though, were you like making like chili rellenos, or were you just or were you just like chopping it up for a?
I was chopping it up because my boyfriend and I have been very obsessed with the Rancho Gordo cookbook lately.
Oh, the
Very
bean
into
people,
beans, yeah. And one of the authors of that book swears by just like throwing some poblano peppers in with some beans in a very sort of unstructured way. But
Right, but to roast them first, so you
first,
get
and then
the
you chop them
smoky
up.
flavor. Okay. Yeah.
Highly recommend.
Just curious. A little more detail on that. Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like when you read that to me, I was like, oh, that sounds depressing. And then it was like to have the like wherewithal to then be like to demand something. I think that there's a few things happening in there. I think for me, like emotionally, I mean, the care crisis that we talk about and that everyone began talking about in earnest during the pandemic, it predates the pandemic and it will outlast the pandemic. So, like for me, I've known this, but like the first 4 months of the pandemic it was just like 24/7 me and my children and my spouse in our house, and it was just so much us. It was really hard. And, you know, I wasn't able to write during that time. And I had a book deadline of July 2020, and I knew by April that there was no way I was
Oh,
going to
wow.
meet that deadline.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of, I was caught up in a lot of grief around like this loss of my creative life. I also felt very strongly that like writing a book or an article was not that important like when faced with like keeping my family safe and my community safe. And so I was like taking care of them is the most important thing I could be doing right now. But I felt like, you know, that sort of what you were talking about, that pleasure of like roasting peppers or you know, like tending to people, like touching, like all of it just felt, I used to take such pleasure in that, and I just felt like I was watching the pleasure and like the color in my life just like drain.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was just this caregiver, you know, and nothing else. And so had those bad feelings. And then around that time, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were talking about essential laborers like healthcare workers and transportation and sanitation workers who are absolutely essential. But I was feeling like, what about me? What about mothers? What about parents? Because, you know, we're all working around the clock, you know, and professional jobs on top of caregiving. So I just felt like it doesn't, in the pandemic again, like I think it broadened it so that more people were engaged in this question of like, because we were seeing that the care structure, which especially with children, you know, the idea is until your child is age 6, like you're just entirely on your own to figure out how to take care of them, like where they should go during the day, like if you have a job. And so like that sort of really paltry care structure under the pandemic was revealed to be wildly unsustainable and like inhumane. So I was wrestling with all of those things, and I just felt like I just feel so strongly like it doesn't like American life just doesn't have to be this hard.
Yeah.
Like what we have normalized it's so hard, and people are working like 2, 3 jobs and they still can't make ends meet. Like it feels increasingly like there's no way to like forget getting ahead. You know, it's like There's no way to just like treading water is what you're doing.
Stay afloat. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm angry about that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an element in there where like I wanted to make meaning from the care work I was doing because I believed that it was really important. And I also needed to remind myself of like the pleasure that is in that, right? And I don't know, like in writing this book, I was just thinking about the world that I want to have, the world that I want my daughters to grow up in. So that was a big part of what was informing it. And then I think there's also this element where, again, like in this, like other countries provide paid leave, right? Other countries provide healthcare. Maybe they don't do all of these things, but there's like affordable childcare, education, right? These are human rights that in the United States are like privatized and tied to working. And I just think that's wrong. It's so clear to me that is wrong. And so this element of like demanding, I think is really, we are just living in such a specifically bad time. And I felt like not naming it as such and not like demanding more from American family life or just from life in general. I think I sort of feel like I'm complicit in it if I don't say, this is really bad and we deserve better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I don't read that sentence as depressing, by the way. I feel like I needed your demand because it made me realize like I actually was sort of ashamed that like I don't have children, and one of the reasons I haven't had them so far is that I kind of accepted all of what you just described and like, well, that sucks, and like I just don't want to. My reaction was like roll over and die. Your reaction was like, I think it should be different.
Well, I think it's also because I already have them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I can't actually roll over and die.
Yeah.
Even though I have at times wanted that. And to me, like the depressing part is the first part of that sentence, which is like, it is exhausting, it's bankrupting.
Like currently.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It's like actually, we're like parents are contributing to the continuation of our species. It seems like we should celebrate that and support it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I thought it was really refreshing too that, it's not, well, first of all, your sort of definition of mothering as opposed to like the sort of like specifically like female or like literally mother, kind of definition, but also that it's, I don't know, I feel like sometimes like the two things that you tie together in this book, I feel like I've only seen them really talked about separately. Like one is like essential workers and essential work of the type that we talked about, a lot more during the pandemic. And then the other is like I feel like sometimes like mothering gets talked about in this really kind of like glorifying way that's like, oh, it's a romanticized.
Yes.
And they're not talked about together.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way that we romanticize motherhood is really divorced from reality. And it's also, it's actually like a double-edged sword, or like it's divorced from reality, but then it's also this standard that for some reason people still feel like they have to live up to. This idea, like I get a lot of questions about mom guilt, right? Because people are like, I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job. And I don't know, I feel like those are all external things. Like, so the idea that you're supposed to enjoy this work, which is incredibly tedious and repetitive and never ending. It just feels really, there's no winning.
Yeah.
There's no having it all. It's really, but I want to talk more about that, like, your thoughts on like putting those two things together.
I mean, I think I don't know, I was really moved by the parts, especially about your family, because I was thinking about my family. My mother and her, that part of my family also immigrated from the Philippines. Everyone except for my mom is in like some kind of nursing or like medical healthcare kind of thing. And I feel like it's not super common knowledge, like the sort of relationship of the U.S. to the Philippines, and like the biggest export of the Philippines is labor.
Yes.
So I thought that was a really like meaningful way to tie together these things that are normally talked about separately.
Yeah, I mean, I was when I had written this book, a proposal for this book, and I was like, oh, it's just essays on mothering and caregiving and something about social change, and I was like, I'm just an essayist, right? And my editor, who was the editor for my first book, was like, I love the idea of this. She was like, but girl, like you need a narrative arc. And I was like, okay. And I mean, one of my former editors is here in the audience. So I love editors. And she was like, what if we did like the first half of the book is kind of a history of caregiving in America? Like, how did we get to this place being the pandemic, where we all now see that the most important, like without people to take care of our children and our disabled and our sick, like society falls apart. Right? And she was like, how did we get here? And we're demanding this work for free of mothers or for free or for very, very low wages from women of color. And then the second half was going to be more forward looking, which it is in the book, like more forward looking about like, how can mothering be a force for social change and sort of like looking towards the future. So I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to write. And then I was like paralyzed for a month because I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, how do I write? How am I actually going to write a history of caregiving in the United States? It's really complicated.
Yeah.
And also, there's just no way that you can do it without grappling with slavery, which is the number one reason why we think like domestic work should be free and done by women of color. And like I use a lot of personal narrative, so I was like, I'm not sure that I'm the person that can like, I don't know if I can tell this history the way that I would like to. And so I had never, I had not planned to write about my family at all. Like that wasn't part of it. And what happened was that there's this statistic that will like never leave my body, like the way it landed. So during the pandemic, I saw, so I guess a little background, like, so my mom is a nurse, and she and my father moved to the United States in 1971. And this sort of like history that we don't talk about enough is that the Philippines was an American colony for the first half of the 20th century. And this was that poem that Rudyard Kipling wrote, The White Man's Burden, it was about the United States presence in the Philippines. So like civilizing the little brown brother, benevolent assimilation, all of that. So the reason why my father speaks 3 languages and my mom is bilingual because the United States created basically an American-style public education system where everyone spoke English. And then they created medical schools and nursing schools, and they presented it as a way, like a path towards economic prosperity. But, you know, internally, Americans talked about it as a way of sanitizing brown people who are inherently backward and inherently diseased and primitive. And then they had not, like the United States had not been allowing, large numbers of immigration from Asia, from other countries, but also including the Philippines, until there was a nursing shortage and there was a healthcare worker shortage after World War II. And then they were like, okay, like we'll let people in, but only highly skilled immigrants. And so my parents qualified for that. So that's like the family history that I ended up going into. But to go back to the statistic, which was sort of the moment that everything came together for me, and when I realized this is how it's all going to work. So the statistic is that Filipinx nurses are 4% of the nursing workforce in the United States, and there are 34% of COVID-related nursing deaths, which is just like, it's devastating, you know? Like, and I was like, this could be my mom, like, this like is my mom in some ways, right? This is like so many people like that I know and love, and that's when I was like, oh, like this is the story that I can tell about caregiving, because it is the same forces, right? It's colonization, it's capitalism, it's white supremacy. And so like, I cannot tell the story of my enslaved ancestors. Like that's not my story to tell. But like the Filipino-American history is one that we just don't really reckon with, you know, and the American colonial legacy. And so that's when I was like, I felt like it's really gratifying as a writer when you get to that moment when you're like, I am cooking with gas now. Like, and I'm like, this is it. And everything kind of like came together in that way. Yeah. And I hadn't really thought about it. I had always known, you know, this sort of story of my family, but we had not really, I mean, clearly, like my parents were not like, let's talk about colonialism. You know? It was really like, it was like they kind of took it for granted, and they also were the first people to be like, we came to America for a better life, and look, like we're upper middle class now. Like we came with nothing, and they worked really hard. But so that like that immigrant narrative is really strong within my own family, and so kind of like digging it up and questioning it are really like like trying to examine it was a more emotionally difficult process than I was
I was gonna
anticipating.
say, is that painful? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know, like but I feel really, yes, but I feel like so much of like a lot of really good work is kind of painful,
yeah,
right? Like, and then also sort of healing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me,
Yeah. And
yeah.
the part where you sort of mention like, you know, kind of like finally talking to your parents about things that you had not talked about, and they're kind of starting to open up. Like if you approach it from a
Yeah.
certain angle, like I've sort of been having that relationship with my mom lately, and so it was really nice to like be experiencing that while reading this, because there's also like, you know, parts of this history that like I don't know about, or that I haven't asked my mom about, but then when I kind of go back and think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's all there. Like when you can see like the sort of like forces of history like playing
Right.
out in your family and in your person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was no way to know that as a child, right? And I think for my parents too, they were just like, look, we're like here in this new country, we're just trying to survive. Like, can we not question like everything about like our family life and why we're here? You know, I
Yeah.
think it was really, yeah. And I think also to talk about my parents as, like, we had these conversations where I was like, well, I mean, the system that brought you here is inherently exploitative, right? And you know, my dad was like, sure, yes,
Yeah.
you know, but then he was also like, oh, but it's really no different from people who go to like medical school and then have to like pay back debt, you know, like, because I mean, my parents were recruited to come to the United States, and they were like advanced money. I mean, they weren't like their moving costs and their plane tickets weren't paid for. They came to the United States, and then that money was withdrawn from their first paychecks, you know. And I was like, that's actually not the same as paying a student loan. Like I was like,
Yeah.
you know, it's explaining that to my dad, and it was, yeah. I mean, I think like we're still in conversation. I feel like in some ways I kind of ambushed them. Like I was really clear with them that I wanted to interview them, and we talked about it, and I tried to explain what I was trying to do in the book as much as I could, even though I wasn't totally sure. But I think I think it's a conversation we'll be having for years, most
Yeah.
likely. Like there is no easy resolution to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think maybe even in general, I've been thinking a lot about how for anyone it's probably hard to ask or talk about things that have to do with care, because it's so it's so hidden.
Yeah.
It's like so associated with like shame,
Yeah.
you know, in a way. And like I was thinking about how like my mom has like always like helped me in these sort of like I don't want to say like furtive, but like, you know, it's like she's like behind the scenes, like making it all
Right.
you know, and then I am just supposed to appear perfect, you know, and it's like as opposed to like acknowledging that structure and like celebrating it and having it be like in the foreground.
Yeah.
And I think so there's like a lot that comes up, I think, for when people start to actually look at that.
Yeah. I mean, when you start to actually talk about care, people get uncomfortable really quickly. I think partly because to talk about care is to say like I am a human being who has needs. So that's also like, so first of all, you're putting yourself in a place of like vulnerability and asking everyone else to acknowledge their vulnerability, which generally as Americans we're just not very good at that. And then I also think, you know, the work of caring for children and caring for the elderly, right? Like, and disabled people, like we outsource that. And then I think people have kind of class guilt around that and shame and get really weird. Like, I mean, I've done interviews with women who are like, I'm that bougie white lady with a nanny. And it's super awkward, but I'm like, yeah, like, if you can afford help, like, I think I'm happy for you that you can do that.
Yeah.
I think we should talk about how we honor that work and pay people a living wage, because, you know, domestic workers are, so like the median wage for like workers across the country is close to $20 an hour, but the median wage for domestic workers is closer to 12. Like there's a very severe drop off, and then nannies are the lowest paid. The median wage for them is $11.60 an hour. So it's, you know, it's not on an individual like the white bougie lady with the nanny to like solve this, but I don't think we can even come close to doing that if we don't talk about it. But the idea of like admitting that you need help there's like some shame around that.
Yeah, and it's very bodily. Like
Yeah.
I so appreciated how like physical this whole book was. I also was like hungry the whole time I was reading. 'Cause you keep mentioning food that sounds really delicious. But like it's yeah, it's very yeah, it's visceral, and it's like the emotional like mind body that needs support from someone or something.
Yeah. I think a lot too about how like how do we value care work, and part of what makes it really beautiful, like people who have done caregiving, like there's a really beautiful, I mean it's messy, it's like physically demanding, but there's like a very tremendous satisfaction, and there's something really beautiful that's in it. But it's also, especially when caring for young children, like I remember there's this book that I love, this novel called The Golden State by a friend of mine named Lydia Kiesling. And there's this scene where she's talking about how, I don't know, she like calms her toddler. I don't know if it's like with a string cheese or she does something, or there's like a song or there's something that she says. And then she talks about how the mom is like, has this very specific moment of grief for this like honey specific knowledge. The child's name is Honey, sorry. Honey specific knowledge that's like not going to last. Like, so there's something about care that's so ephemeral, right? It goes away. And like that is very, very deep bodily knowledge. And then the child changes. And it just like, and so it's really hard to talk about. So I think there's like a challenge in talking about care work, first of all, even as caregivers.
Yeah, totally. That reminds me of, I mentioned this to you earlier, but I wanted to talk about like sort of some of the things that you're redefining or maybe like expanding the definition of. And one of them I think is just language, like what language is, or maybe communication is like a better term. Especially in the chapter you talk about sort of like bodyfulness, which is I forget whose term that was, but
a woman named Christine Caldwell.
Yeah.
It's like a somatic therapist in Boulder, Colorado. It's like, I think she teaches at Naropa.
Yeah. But maybe we can start with that. Just the sort of like what can be communicated, or like what even is communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it. I think I also want to name that there's like all these parallels between, I mean, clearly the book is mostly about caring for children, but I am really interested in continuing to like not privilege one type of care over another. And so I think there's a lot of parallels between caring for children and caring for someone like towards the end of their life, or like as they get older. But I think about how we are born without language, like we don't have words. And I think about how children, you can say to a baby, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. Like, they don't know what you're talking about, right? Like, the only way that, like, really that you can show some, and I mean, this is true for adults, like, the only way to really show love and really convey it is by doing, right? It's like acts of attention to the body. And so I think about that and how, like, so much of, like, caring for my daughters and telling them things are things that I'm doing with my body. And I think about how my mother, who, there's a lot of things that we don't talk about. And I think partly it's because we're so different. We grew up in different cultures, but also my mom doesn't speak English as her first language. And I feel like the way my mom conveys love is much more demonstrative, by cooking, by cleaning, or like there's an extended scene in the book about, I mean, she did this for me, and my favorite thing in the whole world to do is to clean earwax out of my daughter's ears. And it's just like, it's the way, like, I can, like, when I think about that, like, I know that I am loved, like, yes, because my mom told me that, but because I remember what it was like to just, like, have my head in her lap and, like, be held.
Yeah.
It's like a thing that my body knows.
Yeah.
Like, more than anything else, like, that she's ever said to me.
Yeah.
And I talk about it too in the book, in the sense of like dance is really important to me, and movement. And I feel like seeing somebody move through the world, I love like when someone does something and I'm like, oh, like only you could do that, like this strange thing that you're doing, or this beautiful thing you're doing with your arm, right? And I also think like, yes, like verbal, and clearly I'm a writer, so I've, drank the Kool-Aid that like language is good and cool and like a great way to like convey what you're thinking and feeling. But Yeah, I just think that, but really, like, body language is so, we don't talk about that enough either. Like, so much of how we communicate with people is based in nonverbal cues. Um, so those were all things that I was thinking about. And this term bodyfulness, it was interesting to me because she was bringing it up as a, sort of like a counter to mindfulness, where she was like, we can't ignore the body. In fact, like, the body is always working. And so it's this idea that thinking and having words is important, yes, but it is no less important than, like, the sort of, like, bottom up, like, perception and sensory perception that the body is doing. And how can you not privilege one form of language over the other?
Yeah,
I guess that's sort of
totally.
where I'm landing on that, like, wanting
Yeah.
to figure out how to have both.
Yeah, I think there's like a part at the end of that chapter where you say we teach children that they should speak their minds, but we should also teach them to speak their bodies.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh God, I wish I could just like, if there's one thing that I could just like have everyone just learn like all at the same time, that would be it. But yeah, and then I think another term that I saw being redefined is like freedom. Sort of like because there's there's a sort of neoliberal freedom, like freedom
Right.
from others,
Yes.
which I feel like is very tied to like a nuclear family unit, which is also something that you're expanding away from in this book. And like economic, like, I don't know, consumer choice maybe is like is that form of freedom. And then there's this other form of freedom which is like, I guess I would describe it as like freedom from fear. And like, or a sense of security. And you quote Mia Birdsong,
Yeah.
kind of talking about like freedom originally meant like having everything that we need together.
Yes.
Like a space of like safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was a very, that's a really powerful. So Mia Birdsong, who's a Bay Area writer and activist and just very cool person, she wrote this book called How We Show Up. And I can't remember the full subtitle, but it's like reimagining community and
Something like
something
that.
like
Yeah.
but she talks about how, like, the root word of freedom and friend is Freya. I think it's like Indo-European, and it was really, it means beloved. And the idea was that freedom, like, through connection, is how we can guarantee that we have everything that we need: food, security, safety, like all of those human rights, right? That I was talking about at the beginning. And she offers that as a way of countering, like, our general definition of freedom in America is to be unburdened by others and to be able to do, like, whatever I want, whenever I want, right? And that's actually like a betrayal of what, like, the original meaning is. And she urges us to, like, rediscover that, and that the way that we can take care of each other is and have all we need is the only way to do it is by doing it together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's, like, one of the, like, I feel like one of the big themes of the book is interdependence.
Yeah.
That we just need each other so desperately, right? But we all seem to think that we don't, or we try to do it without each other. And I really just want us to all, like, I don't know, just admit that we need each other,
Yeah.
and, like, help each other.
Yeah. I mean, there's like some irony to me in the fact that like if you were to sort of like score really high on the like one scale of freedom, you're probably not doing so well in the other one. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like
yeah.
someone who is like free in a certain way could grow up to be so unfree,
Yes.
like in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not be able to like find a sense of security or ask for help or ask for like accommodations or like anything like that. And then there was one other one that oh yes, like just like what a family is like, because it's obviously like it's really non-nuclear, like what you're talking about, and it made me think of acorn woodpeckers, and you also have a lot of really great examples from ecology in this book, which
Yeah.
I obviously love, but but acorn woodpeckers have like a lot of helpers in there. They have like these big like sort of loose groups. Like I don't know if do you have them up there in Seattle?
I don't know.
They're very noisy. They kind of sound like monkey-ish, and they always sound like they're laughing all the time. And they're in these big groups, and they have all this drama all the time.
Okay.
I think because of the like large social groups.
Right.
But yeah, the way they sort of take care of young is very, there's a lot of like allo parenting or whatever it's called. Like, and so I was thinking of that because it's like there's a way in which like when you start to question conventions about things that are as prevalent as like a family, like it actually, you realize that there are like so many other ways that it could be.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's really, I mean, and I live in like I'm like a straight woman who's in like a like monogamous marriage with a cis hetero white man, right? So it's very like, I'm not exactly bucking the system here, right? Like, but I think about how there are all of these other examples out there, right? Like it is, and I think also I'm like, well, maybe if I had been raised in a different way, or like if the culture was different, like maybe my life wouldn't look like this. Like I'm not trying to like, I'm not going to make like a midlife pivot at this point. Like I'm pretty happy like in my life and my relationship. I'm very secure in that. And it's actually one of the most freeing things in my life is my marriage. But I think about how like, I don't know, like I think that maybe I would have like wanted something different, right? Or wanted more. And I think that like our children can have that. And I also saw like in the pandemic, like the whole idea of having a pod, right? Like that to me is people being like, I can't do this by myself. Like I'm not going to survive. And it was people being like, I want to help you, and what's good for you is good for me, and what's good for us is like good for our children. And I just don't want to lose that. I feel like we didn't call it like this interdependence, but like I just see around me all the time. And like the way that people are talking about mutual aid, like suddenly there's all these little free libraries more in my neighborhood. Like there's community fridges. Like all of this is like what I'm talking about, of like this idea of opening up family and community. I was also thinking about when you were talking about the acorn woodpeckers, there are these leafcutter ants. Do you know leafcutter ants? They're big. The time that I got really into them was when I was traveling in South America, and they're big ants, and they'll be carrying like large, like, I mean, if I'm the ant, right? Like then the leaf is like, this big, and you see them like, and they're in these large things. So when my husband and I were traveling, we were like, what's the deal with these ants? Like we have to like deep dive on this. Yeah. And so they have a very complex social structure, and it's very moving to me. And I see this too in orcas, which are like native to the Northwest, but they don't like put the old folks in a home and like just like the old leafcutter ants are like, they are the people who like those leaves, like they compost it in the garden, and they have this special kind of mold that they need to do their work. And the old people are like the people who like the old ants. Sorry. No, I feel like I'm like dissing the ants here, but so they have these jobs where they're like tending to the garden of the compost, and then they also help out with childcare, right? Yeah. And so like with the little ant care. But so also the orca whales, they they're one of the only mammals that experience menopause, right? But so the older postmenopausal females, they are seen as navigators, and they're seen as like they also do a lot to like train the young. And so just these examples in nature, which, and like this is part of the book, and a lot of it I have to say is like I was really inspired by your work, to see like there are all these other things around us that if we stop and look, like there's so many ideas. The people, like creatures and living things, have wise systems that make sense, and we could really like we have not figured anything out like as a society. Yeah, like we would do really well to like take a page from the leafcutter ants, or or just to try things, right? Especially around like family life and care. I feel like I maybe lost the thread here a little bit, but
oh no, I mean I think you and I probably relied on examples from ecology for the same reason, which is that it's we just need like images of something else than like like Mia Birdsong says, like we need a different American dream, like we need I just need a model that looks different from, and it's, I mean, like I think about this stuff all the time, and it's like deeply ingrained in my brain, like my whole upbringing of just like competition, individualism, like it's like in there,
no, there's a lot of undoing, and there's a lot of active unlearning that I'm still very much engaged in, and that's what I'm trying to like I don't want my kids to have to unlearn a lot of shit, you know what I mean? Like I'm sure I'm passing down some weird stuff to them, and there's going to be stuff. But yeah, like I think about that, and I mean, ecology and like nature is a wonderful place to look for it. But then the other place that I am looking is like to other cultures. You know, like the way that we live is a very distinctly American way, and in other cultures around the world, it's not that way. You know, and I looked back to, and this is not to like I like worry about romanticizing, you know what I mean, or like fetishizing other cultures, but like looking back to indigenous Filipino culture, there's a concept called bayanihan, which is all like community care and living, right? And I just saw something like NPR posted this, like one of the like folk art examples of bayanihan is how you just lift a house up and move it, because like the Philippines is very flood prone. And this was just yesterday, and they saw people like moving a house. Like this still happens. Like,
Oh, really?
like, lift it up on bamboo
I mean, it's probably
sticks.
gonna happen more lately. I mean, because of climate change. But
Yes, exactly. Climate change, or like corporations that are like taking over the land.
like
Yes, there's
gotta
a-
move. Yeah.
But yeah, like so. I mean, just reminding ourselves that like we've undone a lot of like communal living and the work, like the village, right? Like, but that was how people lived around the globe for centuries, right? Again, like what we're doing here is like still like an experiment.
Yeah. Super recent.
Yes, and it's not working.
Yeah.
It's really not
really
working.
So I have this one last thing, maybe section to talk about, and then we'll go to these questions, I guess. But so I had been reading, sort of before I read your book, I had been reading some other stuff about social roles, and how like there's nothing necessarily wrong with the idea that there are roles. You know, everyone plays different roles in their life. The problem arises when someone doesn't make the role their own, so like they don't have a creative relationship to their role. Which, like, my example is always like, if someone was cooking with a recipe and they were like, I need to know how many grains of salt, you'd be like, no, that's for you to decide, you know? But they're like, what do you mean by dash of salt, you know? And like, I feel like that would be like someone who reads a lot of like really, I don't know, pragmatic parenting books and like tries to like find like a formula to like produce the optimal child, or like something like this. And like, and I feel like your book is sort of like, okay, here's like a role, and it's like called mothering. It's not just for mothers, and it's like directed towards, you know, many different types of people. And it has to be done. And like, what is the most meaningful way of relating to this role? And like, in so doing, like, that is a creative act, you know, like it's a creative, ingenious act. Yeah. And so I was just, and you talk about sort of like, also just like making it less lonely, which I think is part of making it meaningful. Like the washing society example, which I really loved.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's like all these examples of, I mean, because we've like broken the labor movement in this country, like it's harder to imagine doing this. But like that example is, you know, before washing machines, to be like a laundress was, it was actually, I mean, it was incredibly physically demanding work. You're like making soap, you're boiling clothes, you're like washing them on a board.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're ironing them. But it was social. So like on a like nice day, you could like get together with your friends who were also, and so this is like, this is Atlanta, like turn of the, like at the beginning of the 20th century. And most of the black women, and many black women in Atlanta worked as laundresses. And they got together and they were like, this, like working conditions are not great. Like we want more pay and we want like more. And so they organized while doing this, like while doing this work. And then they like basically formed a union and were going to strike. And then they got their demands. Right. And so I think that that's like, again, there's, I don't know, what I want to say about this too is like with care, it's all work is good work.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there's this, this idea that care work is, it's a myth to say that it's like unskilled labor, and that myth is so that we can not pay people to do it, you know, but it in fact is highly skilled, right? Like, again, that sort of like intimate bodily knowledge that we were talking about, but like household management is like a shit show, you know, like logistics and all that stuff. Like you could spend all of your time doing that, you know, and negotiating, right? Negotiating with irrational people, like that's what parenting is, you know, like it's really, and you know, but all of that stuff is, I want to make care work visible, and I also want to insist on like the need to value it.
Yeah.
Like if not financially, hopefully, but but culturally. And I think that I think a lot of people would have less trouble making their role their own if it didn't feel like they were doing it in isolation and they didn't, and it, like the expectation is to never talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. And this
Yeah.
idea of mothering too is, you know, it's other people, but then it's also yourself, you know, taking care of yourself. Like that's mothering. Like you have to do that. Like you have to bathe at some point, you know, like you have to feed yourself at some point.
Well,
I'm not a
do
big, like, you know, every few days kind of showering person. We have loose bathing standards. I think in our house that my mother was like horrified to find out when my daughter was like, we only shower like every 4 or 5 days at our house. But that kind of stuff is really like, it's so basic, you know, and it's extending it to take care of people, but it really like begins with yourself. Like that's the work that will never go away. I wondered can I ask you, like you had mentioned
Yeah.
in an email like before that, because this is like part of the book for sure. And I haven't had a chance to talk about it, and I'm just really interested because I'm always interested in what you're thinking about generally. But you talked about like self-compassion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so the reason I was thinking about it was that I have started more and more of my friends have young children. And one of them was saying, or has said multiple times, like, you know, I think, you know, he has a 3-year-old and a baby. And it's like, he's like, it really makes you realize that like everything that you think that you have all this like intellectual stuff on top of is just that. Like, it's just, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm scared. I'm like, I want to be accepted.
Yeah.
And like that there aren't that many. There's, I don't know, maybe like 5, right? Like,
Right.
And it's like, or like you're tired and you don't know it. You need to go to bed. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like, and I was like, oh my God. It was like, I had this like epiphany where I was like, everything is like reducible to like fear or like love and curiosity and like wanting to go toward. And like, you can only do the second one if you feel safe. right?
Yeah.
Like, and usually it's like, you know, someone is around you, like making you feel safe.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I've like in trying to like learn self-compassion for myself, like I realized that I started asking like, what does kid Jenny need? You know, like instead of like, it's actually just me, but like somehow if I call it like kid Jenny,
Right.
like it makes it's like, oh, like she just like needs to eat.
Yeah. It's
thing
easier
that she wants to
access
eat.
that.
Yeah.
Because we also think about like, I mean, this is interesting. Like children have basically, it's okay because I'm a mom and I'm writing about mothering, so people will understand this when I say like children have like done nothing to like deserve our life except be born, which is enough, right? So I can say that, right? Like just simply by being born, you're deserving of love and care and all of that. But like we tend to like kid Jenny or like kid Angela, because I do that with myself, like without a thought, right? Like the way we would take care of a young person. More people like would be generous toward a child than they would be towards an adult. Right.
Yeah.
And like, why? And this is like, I mean, like, why is that? You know, because our needs are the same.
Yeah.
And that sort of like care should not go away. Like the care that we give a child, like we should be able to like care for ourselves that way and care for like in adulthood. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like that need and like the relationship between safety and curiosity and like love also doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to tell you about this photo that I have on my desk of my mom. Like, so I'm like on some monkey bars and my mom, I don't know, probably like 5 or something. And my mom is like holding me in a way where I clearly sort of think that like I'm just on the monkey bars, but she's like, I got you, you know? And like, I think a lot about like things that she did like really early on that made it like possible for me to just become like a very curious person. And like, I still carry that, you know, but it also means that I have to learn how to do what she did for myself.
Right. And it's hard when that work was like, I mean, it's great that you have this photo, like, but when that work seems, and as kids, it's like, I don't know, we want to like protect our children. Like, I don't need my children to see like every single thing I do for them, right? Like, but I have been more conscious about being like, hey, like I'm making you dinner. Like, maybe now's not the time to scream at me. Like, maybe now's the time to say like, thanks, because like what I'm doing is work, right? And like, I love you and I would never stop doing this, but this is work. You know what I mean? So I think there's this I don't know, maybe someone in the audience knows. There's this, I think it's an Ada Limon poem, and I can't remember the name of it, but she's talking about her mother, and there's like this image of this rainstorm, but like it's I think a thing that a lot of people realize later in life, and she says something like my God, like I have been standing on this whole time, like she's like, the idea is, I'm massacring this, but it's like she's not getting wet in this rainstorm, and she's like my God, like this whole time I was standing like underneath her jacket, and
Yeah.
I never knew it.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? Like she just thought she was
Yeah.
like she was just sort of like safe, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone, I'm gonna find this because I feel really bad. Sorry, Ada Limon, that I really kind of like butchered that because it's so beautiful, and the way the line comes at the end of the poem is when you're like,
Ugh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh shit, that's me. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I want, yeah, and that's another thing. Like, I mean, I mean, that idea of like self-compassion, like that's something too, like when you mentioned it, like I got really excited because I think like a lot of this book is realizing like when I like set out to think about how I want to mother, it was very humbling to realize that so much of it is based on how I was mothered, like as a in conversation with that, and then also as a reaction to that, and accepting that my parents are people who, and my own mother, like is just a person
Yeah.
who like could
Yeah.
no way ever give me everything, and then realizing like I think during a period of my life I was probably like angry about that, and now I'm so much more like understanding, like and feeling sort of bad. But I've also realized like made peace with like how I've kind of mothered myself, right? Like I feel like a lot of this book is me realizing like these are the things that I didn't get, but like what am I going to do? Like, am I
Right.
going to like be upset about it, or am I going to like do the work to make myself feel whole so that I can like take care of my daughters in a way that feels
Yeah.
right to
Yeah.
me?
I mean, earlier today, I was thinking about how, like, it's the sort of like classic immigrant parent thing to say, like, I want you to have things that I didn't have. And like
Right.
a lot of times that's like material
Yeah.
things. But like there's another interpretation of that I think you can take from this book, which is like, I want you to have things that I didn't have. Those things are like emotional resources
Yeah.
and like self love and like being comfortable in your body and like understanding
Yes.
interdependence. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, thank you. That's exactly, yeah. I did this, I did an event in Seattle with a woman, a friend of mine named Mel, she owns a Filipinx restaurant. And my parents were there. It was very emotional. And she was like speaking directly to my parents, and I was looking at my parents. And one of the things we talked about is how like, as a child of immigrants, like I'm aware that like everything that's good about my life is because of like a lot of their sacrifice and a lot of their work. So like to me to have choice, like, and to be like a creative person and to be able to be curious and have our like life of the mind, right? Like is because of like a lot of labor, right?
Yeah.
That they did. And then I think about it, it's like, sometimes I think that that's disappointing to them. Sometimes I think they're just really trying to like wrap their mind around it and be supportive in the ways that they can, even though I feel like I still want them to like acknowledge it in a way that I'm not sure they're able to. But Mel and I were talking about how like, and this is me crying, like literally looking at my parents, because we talk about how like, I think actually that the best way to honor like the work that they have done and all of their sacrifice is to actually fully be me.
yeah.
Which is like not
Yeah.
a rejection of them, but it is like wanting to give my children and give myself those things that,
It's like the best possible thing.
yeah.
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 That's beautiful. Okay, I have audience questions that we should get to.
Yeah.
Okay. How concerned were you about providing hope and joy in the book, not getting bogged down by the neglect of moms and families? And did you have a method or a strategy for returning to that hope?
I think a lot about, I've quoted people ask me about hope a lot, and I turn to someone else's words on hope, which is there's a writer and abolitionist named Mariam Kaba who says that hope is a discipline, right? And so that's what I always think about is like, it's so easy to, there's so much to feel really terrible about right now. And I just think about like how we're just living in this one moment, which is a very specific modern sort of hell, and like the climate aspect of things makes it harder, but like people have lived through really terrible things. Like our ancestors have lived through very terrible things, and like marginalized people in the United States have like been living like this under really hard circumstances for a long time. So there's part of me that is like, I literally cannot afford to give up hope. And so part of writing this book was like, maybe there's like an aspirational aspect of it. It's like writing my place back to like being in touch with that hope.
Yeah.
You know, like writing is for me sort of selfish. Like I think there's a service component that I feel very strongly about, but it is also like I need to be reminded of that, and writing towards that is what's helpful to me.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. Yeah. You're like, I think I'm writing to save my life. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think about that, yeah, when people talk about how to do nothing and like when you started, how you started writing it and why you
Yeah.
started writing it.
Yeah, this was after the election. Yeah. Okay, how does it feel being on a book tour given your feelings, and that has asterisks around it, about ambition and earning a living?
I feel like this is just fun. Like the book tour is like I do not feel any type of way about it. I feel really like I worked really hard. And like my general stance is like I'm not opposed to working hard. I work hard. I just am never trying to work harder. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not like I'm not like after more, right? And
Yeah.
so a book tour is I feel really so fortunate. Like I was just telling Jenny this backstage, like I was in conversation with my friend Shruti last night. Her name is Shruti Swami, and she's a fiction writer. And she released two amazing books. One is called A House Is a Body. It's short stories. And the other one is called The Archer. It's a novel, and you should buy them because she's a genius. And she published both of those books during the pandemic. And like she didn't get to do what I'm doing. Like this is the closest thing you get to like a victory lap. You know, like I'm always like it's like Chariots of Fire, and I'm like out here, you know. And so I think I just decided like I'm just gonna enjoy this, you know. And also like this is not my real life, you know. Like it's really fun to be in conversation with people, like so many people I admire, like, and to be able to like interact with people. But like my real life is waiting for me at home, and it is like begging a child to put clothes on. You know? So yeah, I don't feel like it's yeah, I just think of this as like I just decided like this is gonna be all about enjoyment and fun, and it's been really great.
Oh my God, I need to like take that away for next year for me because like I feel a lot of ways about it. But yeah, I'm gonna try to like absorb that.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. Ooh, this is a little bit hard to read. How do you think something? Ooh, I don't know if I can read this. Homecoming. You talk about the concept of homecoming. Sorry, I can't read the first part before that. How do you think society? Sorry, does someone recognize this question? Maybe they can ask it.
We won't look at you. You can
Yeah,
shout it out.
yeah.
So like with
Yeah,
homecoming and the idea of culture, how do you think society sort of discounts how culture is passed on through the act of mothering? And if we could quantify it, like should we? And then how would we subsidize that?
Yeah, I mean, I think our culture does not, let's see here. So like this idea of homecoming, like which I write about in the book is, you know, I don't think I could not ever like literally return to, and I don't want to, like I love my complex Filipino American family very much. And like I'm not trying to like undo that. But I think like the concept of homecoming that I explore in the book is like, if nothing else in America, like there are so many, like we live among so many cultures, right? And like if this whole you know, I was told earlier that we were a melting pot, which is like assimilate and like dissolve your identity, right? Now we're like a mixed green salad, right? Like where we're all like, and so but I think about that, it's like, why not, like in this concept of homecoming, and I'm not talking about co-opting other cultures, but like, why not take what ideas like work and resonate with us from other cultures and try those things, right? This is like a thing that I'm like exploring and thinking about. But in terms of like, I mean, like how we hand down culture is directly through mothering and caregiving, which is why like I want to, like this book is about disrupting that, or like not just God, what a bad word to use in San Francisco, but I mean that as like I like took a walk through Salesforce Park today, and I was like, this city really serves up a lot of mixed feelings, like with everything.
Yep.
But I'm sorry for using the word disrupt in this context, but I mean it in its original sense. But I think, like when we talk about mothering, like mothering is seen as like a super culturally traditional act. But I think that actually mothering is deeply radical if we choose to like impart and consciously make an effort to pass down the values like that we want. Like I think about how, just that idea of like, I don't know that like the stuff that I want for like our country will happen like in my lifetime. Like just pick one of many things, like full body autonomy, right? But like maybe that could happen during my children's lifetime. But the only way that happens is if I talk to them about it from the very beginning. So yeah, and then I don't know if that answers the question. And then how we subsidize it is just like, I mean, we're a very rich country. Like we could have a more humane society if we chose to, right? Like the current administration ran on paid family leave, right? They ran, like promises were made, right? Like I think that the money is there. It's just about how exactly we get there. I don't know. I will say that I did a really wonderful event with Ai-jen Poo, who's the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, who are like, they have never stopped. They've been doing this work for decades. They're like on Capitol Hill meeting with senators. They're getting like provisions for care, like written into bills, like to fund early childhood education, right? Like, so I mean, I would say like one of the things you can do is like support people doing that work, like, which is a way of getting us closer to subsidizing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think at some point you also mentioned how few women there are in Congress, which seems like another.
We're at an all-time historic high. It's 27% right now.
Yeah. So like high, it's a high, but it's low.
Yes,
Yeah. Which like obviously ends up, reflecting like there's a missing viewpoint there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when, was it 2016? Yeah. I was like, I was never like, oh yeah, like Hillary Clinton's my candidate, right? Like I had like a lot of mixed feelings, but the thing that I came back to when I ultimately was like, oh, I'm gonna vote for her, it was because I had learned that after she had Chelsea, she wrote her law firm's maternity leave policy because it didn't exist, because like no woman had ever had a child and returned. And so when I thought about that as like, that's who we need in office. Like we need people like that. I think she's from California, like Representative Katie Porter, right? She's cool. She's a single mom, and she's always like talking about like those issues. And it's just like people make decisions based on their lives. And like when our lawmakers like are not affected by like any of the things that like all of us are living with, like, that's what we have.
Yeah.
That's what we have now.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. Many of my friends and I are reluctant to have children because of the cognitive dissonance seemingly required to bring children into the world. Does that exist for you, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't blame you. I really, I had my first child 8 years ago, and frankly, it feels like another time. Like I totally am very, I understand like wrestling with that question more now. And I would say like, if you're unsure and if you don't know how you're going to pay for it, like, it's okay. You don't have to have kids. Like, and seriously, like I don't know. The thing that I want to say though, is that like, you don't have to have kids and you don't have to want kids to have like meaningful relationships with them. Like this idea of mothering and nurturing, like there are so many ways, like I don't know, like I'm glad that I have my children, but I do think a lot about how I direct my care energy outside of our home. And I think that a lot of us have a lot more care energy to give. Most of us do, because I'm a very depleted parent and I'm still thinking about like how to do that, right? Like we have that. And I think like when you extend care to someone, you actually find that like it's really beautiful. I don't know, it's like a mystery. It's like I had a second child and I was like, there's actually more love. Like I was worried, like, is there enough of it to go around? Like there is. Like, and so I think, I don't know. I guess I would just say, like, if you feel like conflicted about having children, like, I hear you. And I think, like, you can still show up for children and parents and families and be a part of family in a really meaningful way.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to have kids.
I mean, as someone who really relates to that question, like one of the things that frustrates me and is a reason that, like, you know, everyone should read this book, not just someone who's in like a sort of obvious caregiving role, is like, I'm frustrated that it's not easier for me to have that kind of relationship, like to be like the godparent or like the allo parent or like the other acorn woodpecker, right? Yeah. Like it's things are not set up to make that easy. And like I was thinking about this, so sad, but like the same. Okay, so the friend who was like, oh, I realized that like having a kid just, you know, like that's me. There was this day when we were visiting those friends and their neighbors got home and they also have a 3-year-old. So the 2 3-year-olds are now like just playing. And then I think there was like a dog involved, and then we were all standing outside and talking, and the woman across the street like came out and her face lit up and she said like, oh, it's like a real neighborhood. And she like came over and like wanted to like hang out, you know?
Yeah.
And like, it was just like, you know, it's like everyone like sees that and wants it and goes toward it, you know? And it's like, it's just like right now I feel like everyone's kind of trying to like jerry rig that, like with like what we have. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think people really, it is, it's a deeply human urge. And I think it's really beautiful to like want to belong and like be a part of something and like be in community. And yeah, it seems so simple, but we've just drifted so far from it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is like how, I was like, is there a way, like, so parents are always encouraged like to feel like a whole person again. You're supposed to like get away from your children, right? Which like we definitely like need that break, right? But I also think about like, what's like the reverse of that? Like instead of parents trying to escape, like how about people who don't have dependents? Is there a way to like incentivize them to like I've been thinking about things like, could we offer people a tax break for like hanging out with children, right? Or like going to visit old people, right?
Yeah.
Like, these kinds of things are like, I mean, we shouldn't have to like financially incentivize it, but like we could do things to do that. Like I feel like we're always trying to live like that idea of freedom, like we're trying to live unattached. But what if we like just actually tried to make everyone be more attached and interdependent? What would that look like? And you know, I also think about how, again, like we've privatized everything, right? But like, what about like the public pool and the community center and the places like, you know, like, it's like, you know, other feminist scholars are, even they talk about it as the commons.
Yeah.
You know, like we've really done away with the commons.
Yeah.
And investing in those kinds of things would create more opportunities for people to interact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I need to ask you the last question.
Right.
Which is a tradition. It's a tradition here to ask our speakers the following question. What is your 60-second idea to change the world?
So I was told at the beginning that I was going to be asked this question, and then I didn't prepare at all. I've been like, to talk. So, I mean, I know this is cheating, but like, I feel like we have had a 60-minute conversation about what I really think is like a way to like change the world, which is but I'll do it in 10 seconds, which is that I think to change the world, what we need to do is slow down, like chill out, and take care of each other.
Amazing. Yeah.
I've done too much talking already.
Okay. Our thanks to Angela Garbez for joining us today. We encourage all of you to pick up your copy of Angela's book here tonight or at your local independent bookstore. If you would like to watch more programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual and in-person programming possible, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. I am Jenny Odell. Thank you and take care.